They say grief has 5 stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. It's a neat little list they print on pamphlets in hospital waiting rooms. Tidy, manageable. But they're wrong. They always forget the 6th stage, the one they don't want to talk about. The one that comes after the world has gone quiet and the casseroles stop arriving. Clarity. The kind of clarity that cuts like glass. I didn't cry at my husband Richard's funeral. Not a single tear. For 55 years, that man had been the architect of my silence, the curator of my cage. His death wasn't a loss. It was a release, a long overdue parole. My son David performed his grief with the studied precision of an actor angling for an award. His shoulders slumped just so. The tremble in his voice when he delivered the eulogy was a masterpiece of filial devotion. He spoke of Richard's strength, his integrity, his role as a pillar of the Havenwood community. I sat in the front pew, my back ramrod straight, and listened to him paint a portrait of a man who never existed. David had learned his lines well. He'd had a lifetime of practice watching his father perform the same role of the benevolent patriarch. But it was my daughter-in-law, Sophia, who gave the game away. Her eyes, framed by a tastefully subtle application of waterproof mascara, weren't on the polished mahogany coffin being lowered into the Ohio soil. They weren't on her grieving husband. They were on the house, not our home. The house, the asset. A sprawling Tudor on 3 acres, the crown jewel of Havenwood's oldest neighborhood. Her gaze was that of an appraiser calculating square footage and market value. In the back of the black town car gliding away from the cemetery, the silence was thick, suffocating. David stared out the window, his jaw tight. He was already assuming his father's role, using silence as a weapon, a form of agreement. Then Sophia's hand, cool and dry, landed on mine. It was meant to be a gesture of comfort. It felt like a claim. "We need to be practical, Elizabeth," she murmured, her voice a syrupy blend of condescension and feigned sympathy. "I know this is hard, but the market, it's just incredible right now. A house that big, all those memories. It's a burden for a woman on her own. A burden. 55 years of my life reduced to a line on a real estate listing. A burden." I didn't pull my hand away. I let it lie there, limp and cold under hers, a perfect imitation of the woman they thought I was. The frail, grieving widow. I just nodded. "Of course, Sophia," I said, my voice a whisper. "Whatever you and David think is best." David turned from the window, a flicker of relief in his eyes. He thought he'd won. He thought the transition of power would be seamless from his father to him. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The deal was sealed. The vultures were circling, and they didn't even have the decency to wait until the body was cold. They thought I was the carcass. They had no idea I was the one setting the trap. The house wasn't a home. It was a museum of my subjugation. The moment I walked through the front door after they dropped me off, the air changed. It was no longer filled with Richard's oppressive presence, but with the ghost of it. Every room held an echo of his quiet tyranny, a permanent stain on the wallpaper. I stood in the grand entryway, the silence roaring in my ears. For the first time in over half a century, I was truly alone here. The silence should have been a comfort. Instead, it was an accusation. Why had I allowed it for so long? I walked into the living room, running my hand over the silk damask sofa. This was the stage for his public humiliations. I remembered a dinner party maybe 20 years ago. We had the mayor over. I'd been telling a story about a trip we'd taken to Italy. I used the word infer when I meant imply. Richard didn't even look at me. He just held up a hand, silencing me mid-sentence. "Elizabeth," he said, a thin, cruel smile on his lips as he turned to our guests. "My dear wife, bless her heart, occasionally gets her wires crossed. A common mistake for the fairer sex, I suppose. What she meant to say was, the room fell silent. The mayor chuckled awkwardly. I felt my face burn the heat, prickling up my neck. I looked at David, who was a young man, then home from college. He just stared down at his plate, meticulously cutting his steak into tiny, perfect squares. He didn't defend me. He didn't meet my eye. He just chewed his food, his silence a familiar accomplice. He had already learned the most important lesson his father had to teach: my voice didn't matter. I moved to the kitchen, a space he'd designed to be efficient, not warm. Gleaming stainless steel, cold granite countertops. This was where he controlled the finances. He gave me an allowance, a budget, calculated down to the last cent. I had to keep a ledger. Every gallon of milk, every loaf of bread, every single purchase had to be recorded. Once I'd gone over by $3.47. I'd bought a small bouquet of daisies for the table. An unforgivable extravagance. He didn't yell. Richard rarely yelled. Yelling was messy, uncivilized. Instead, he'd sat me down at this very table, the ledger open between us. "Explain this, Elizabeth." He'd said, his voice dangerously calm, as he tapped the entry for the flowers. They were pretty, Richard. They brightened the room. He'd stared at me for a long moment, his eyes like chips of ice. "The budget is not a suggestion, it is a rule. Your inability to adhere to a simple rule suggests a flaw in your character, a lack of discipline. We will have to correct that." For the next month, he reduced my allowance by 20%. He said it was to teach me the value of money. What it really taught me was the cost of a single small moment of joy. I drifted upstairs, my feet silent on the thick Persian runner. I passed the master bedroom, the door slightly ajar. I couldn't bring myself to look inside. That room held the worst of the echoes, the accidents, the times I had displeased him. A fall down a few steps that resulted in a sprained wrist, a slip in the bathroom that left a purple bloom on my cheekbone, artfully hidden with makeup for a week. He was always so sorry afterward, so gentle. He would tend to my injuries himself, his touch a sickening blend of penance and possession. "Oh, my clumsy girl," he would murmur. "You must be more careful." David saw it. Of course he saw it. He saw the bruises. He heard the muffled sounds. But he learned to look away. He learned that survival in this house meant aligning with the power, not with the powerless. He learned from the master. And then there was the study, Richard's sanctuary, a room I was never allowed to enter without him. It was his fortress of solitude, the door always locked. Even the cleaning staff had to be supervised when they went in. While he was alive, that locked door was a symbol of his power over me, a physical barrier to his world. Now it was just a door. I don't know what propelled me. Maybe it was the memory of Sophia's greedy eyes, or David's casual betrayal in the car. Maybe it was 55 years of pent-up rebellion, finally finding a crack in the dam. I walked to the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. The key was exactly where he always kept it, on a small hook behind a framed photo of his father. My hand trembled as I put it in the lock. It felt like sacrilege. The click of the tumbler turning was the loudest sound I had ever heard. The room smelled of him. Old leather pipe tobacco and something else. Something cold and sterile. It was immaculate. Books on finance and history lined the walls, arranged by size and color. A heavy mahogany desk dominated the space, its surface clear, except for a single ornate letter opener. It was the nerve center of his empire, the place where he had controlled my life, our finances, everything. I was supposed to be clearing it out. That was the practical reason David and Sophia had given for leaving me alone. "Take your time, Mum. Go through his things. See what you want to keep." They expected me to pack up a few sentimental trinkums, then call the movers. I ran my fingers over the smooth, cool surface of his desk. I sat in his chair. The leather sighed under my weight. From this vantage point, I could see the whole room, the whole domain. I felt nothing but a hollow emptiness. There was nothing of value here. Not for me. I started pulling open drawers. They were filled with files, contracts, bank statements, a meticulous record of a life built on control. It was clinical, devoid of personality. I was about to give up, to leave this mausoleum to its ghosts, when my foot knocked against the leg of the desk. My shoe scuffed the Persian rug beneath it, and I bent down to smooth it out. That's when I saw it. Under the deep shadow of the desk, one of the dark oak floorboards wasn't quite flush with the others. It was just a sliver, a millimetre of difference, but in this room of perfect order, it was a glaring mistake. My breath caught. I knelt my old knees, protesting, and pressed on the edge of the board. It gave just slightly. Using the tip of the heavy letter opener from his desk, I pried it up. The wood groaned in protest. Beneath it was a small dark cavity carved out of the subfloor, and nestled inside was a small leather-bound journal. It wasn't his. I knew his handwriting, the sharp, aggressive slant of his script. This was different. The cover was worn soft to the touch. I opened it. The handwriting was a woman's, looping, elegant, but frantic, as if the words were desperate to escape the page. The first entry was dated 12 years ago. Her name was Eleanor. I sat there on the floor of my dead husband's forbidden study, and I began to read. The diary wasn't just a record of an affair. It was a ghost's last will and testament. Eleanor's words painted a portrait of horrors that mirrored my own so closely it stole my breath. But her story had an intensity, a desperation that I had managed to bury deep inside myself. He says he loves me. I read my voice, a choked whisper in the silent room. But his love feels like a cage. He bought me this beautiful apartment, he said, so I could have my own space. But I can't have guests without his permission. He calls 5 times a day. If I don't answer, he shows up at the door, his face a mask of concern. He went through my phone last night while I was sleeping. He said he was just worried about me. Worried I might be talking to someone who would upset me. He is the only one who upsets me. It was Richard. The same control. The same suffocating possessiveness repackaged for a different woman. I felt a cold dread seep into my bones. I kept reading, my hands shaking. The entries grew darker. He gets angry when I see my friends. He says they are a bad influence. Last week I had coffee with Sarah. He found out. I don't know how. He came over that night. He didn't shout. He just looked at me. He backed me into a corner and told me how disappointed he was. How I had betrayed his trust. He took my car keys. He said it was for my own good until I could learn to make better choices. I feel like a prisoner. The budgets. The isolation. It was his pattern, a blueprint for breaking a woman's spirit. I flipped through the pages, the looping script becoming more jagged, more desperate. And then I found the last entries. He told me I was worthless without him, that no one else would ever want me. He laughed when I cried. He said my tears were pathetic. He hit me tonight, for the first time. It wasn't a slap. It was a punch. To my stomach, where no one would see the bruise. He said I made him do it. My God, I think I believe him. The final entry was short, just a few lines dated the day before she died. There is no escape. The cage is locked from the inside. He has the only key. I am so tired. The newspapers at the time had called it a tragedy, a beautiful, troubled woman who had taken her own life, an overdose. No one suspected a thing. Richard had been the picture of a grieving friend, a benefactor shocked by her sudden despair. He had even paid for her funeral. A final, grotesque act of control. I closed the journal, my knuckles white. This wasn't just about my own 55 years of quiet suffering anymore. This was about Eleanor. Richard hadn't just broken her spirit, he had murdered it, and he had gotten away with it. The clarity I felt at the funeral sharpened into a razor's edge. This was no longer just about surviving. It was about justice. A debt had to be paid. The diary was a weapon left behind by a ghost. And it contained one final crucial piece of information. In an early entry, filled with the hope and naivety of a new love, Eleanor had written about her deepest regret. A daughter given up for a closed adoption decades earlier, long before she met Richard. A baby she had named Mia. My plan began to form not as a sudden revelation, but as a slow, cold burn in the pit of my stomach. David and Sophia saw me as a relic, a feeble old woman to be managed and disposed of. They were about to find out how wrong they were. My revenge would not be loud or explosive. It would be like Richard's cruelty, quiet, meticulous, and devastating. First, I needed an ally. Not just any ally. I needed a ghost of my own. I needed to find Mia. The search wasn't simple. A closed adoption from nearly 30 years ago is a sealed fortress of legal documents. Going through official channels was out of the question. It would take years and leave a paper trail a mile long. David, with his connections, would hear about it in a heartbeat. I had to move in the shadows. For the first time in my life, I was grateful for the sterile, anonymous nature of the internet. I bought a new laptop, a cheap one with cash. I started learning. I spent 3 weeks not just grieving or packing, but studying. I learned about VPNs, private browsers, like Tor encrypted searches, and the deep, murky corners of the web where information is a commodity. My days were a performance for the outside world. I'd speak to David on the phone, my voice frail, telling him how overwhelming it all was. I'd let Sophia drop off groceries, thanking her profusely for her kindness, while she scanned the living room for any signs of packing boxes. My nights were different. The house would fall silent, and I would descend into my new world, hunched over the glowing screen, in the one room they'd never think to check, the small sewing room at the back of the house. I wasn't searching for a long-lost daughter. I was searching for a very specific skill set. I searched for retrieval specialists, skip tracers, digital ghosts, people who could find anyone for a price with no questions asked. I waded through dozens of shady websites and dead ends. It was a frustrating, terrifying process, a practical obstacle I hadn't anticipated. For a moment, I felt the old helplessness creep back in. I was an 80-year-old woman trying to play spy. It was absurd. I almost gave up. Then I would open Eleanor's diary, read a random passage, and the cold fury would return, burning away the doubt. I was doing this for her. I was doing this for me. Finally, after countless dead ends, I found a name on a secure, encrypted forum. Not a name, really. A handle, Chameleon. The reviews were brief but potent. Finds needles in haystacks. Leaves no footprints. If they don't want to be found, she's the one you call. There was a secure, anonymous contact method. I sent a simple, untraceable message: I need to find a needle. Born in Ohio, circa 28 years ago. First name, Mia. The reply came 24 hours later. Haystacks have a price. Prove you're serious. It was a test. They wanted to know if I was a professional or just a desperate amateur who would fold under pressure. I transferred a small amount of cryptocurrency, something else I'd painstakingly taught myself to use, to the designated account. It was a leap of faith. The money vanished into the digital ether. For 2 days, there was nothing. I thought I'd been scammed. Then a new message appeared. A single file. It contained a birth certificate, an adoption record, and a current driver's license. For Mia Thorne, 28 years old. Current address in Chicago. Occupation, private investigator. My ghost had a name and a profession. It was perfect. The universe, it seemed, was finally on my side. The next message was from her directly. My services are expensive. What do you want with me? I replied, It's not about what I want. It's about what you are owed. It's about your mother, Eleanor. Silence. For a full day. I weighted my stomach in knots. I had laid my only card on the table. Finally, a new message. Where and when? I chose a place 100 miles from Havenwood. A quiet, forgotten diner off a state highway, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and a waitress who'd seen it all. I arrived early, sitting in a booth in the back corner, Eleanor's diary in my handbag, like a loaded gun. She walked in exactly on time. She was not what I expected. She was small, unassuming, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore jeans and a plain grey hoodie. She could have been anyone. A college student, a barista. But her eyes were different. They were old eyes in a young face, sharp, assessing, and utterly devoid of sentiment. They were flint. She slid into the booth opposite me without a word. The waitress came over. Mia ordered a black coffee. I asked for tea. We sat in silence until the drinks arrived. She took a sip of her coffee, her gaze never leaving my face. You have 5 minutes to convince me this isn't a waste of my time, she said, her voice low and even. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I took the small leather journal from my bag and pushed it across the table. Your mother's, I said. She stared at it, her expression unreadable. She didn't reach for it immediately. She looked at me, then at the journal, then back at me. How did you get this? It was hidden in the home of the man who destroyed her, I said. My husband, Richard. Her eyes narrowed just slightly. It was the only flicker of emotion I had seen. She finally picked up the journal, her touch surprisingly gentle. She opened it and began to read. I watched her face, searching for some sign of the daughter Eleanor had written about. I saw nothing. No tears, no shock, no anger, just a deep, focused concentration. She was not reading her mother's words. She was analyzing a case file, absorbing data. She read for a long time. The waitress came and went, refilling her coffee. The diner slowly emptied out as the lunch rush ended. When she finally looked up, the flint in her eyes had hardened into steel. He's dead, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes, I said. 2 months ago. And you lived with him through all of this. I met her gaze. Yes. I didn't offer excuses. I didn't talk about fear or social pressure or financial dependence. She wouldn't care. The truth was, the only currency we had. She closed the diary. So he's dead. Justice is off the table. What do you want from me? Richard left a legacy, I said, leaning forward. A son who is just like him. A son who, along with his wife, is planning to sell my home, take my money, and put me in a facility so they can live off the spoils. They think I'm a senile old woman who can be easily pushed aside. Richard's cruelty didn't die with him. It lives on in my son. That is the debt that needs to be paid. Mia was silent for a long moment, tapping a finger on the cover of the journal. This is personal for you. I don't do personal. Your mother's last words are in that book, I said quietly. He took her life as surely as if he'd held a gun to her head. His son is a product of that same poison. Tell me that's not personal. A muscle in her jaw twitched. She looked down at the diary, then back at me. What's the plan? We didn't sign a contract. We didn't discuss fees. In that moment, we were something else. Not client and investigator. We were an alliance forged in the shared fire of Richard's destruction. The story we would sell to the world began to take shape right there, in that greasy spoon diner. It had to be simple, believable, and designed to provoke the exact reaction we wanted from David and Sophia. You'll be an actress, I said the idea, clicking into place. A young, aspiring actress. I've hired you as a companion, someone to bring a little life back into this big, empty house. You're vibrant, a little bohemian, everything that I'm not supposed to be. Mia nodded slowly, a flicker of something new in her eyes. It wasn't a smile, not yet. It was the look of a predator spotting its prey. They'll hate it, she said. An outsider in their house spending their inheritance. They'll see me as a threat. Exactly, I said. They'll see you as a gold-digging manipulator. They'll underestimate you. And they will underestimate me. They'll get sloppy. They'll get angry. And they'll reveal exactly who they are. And while I'm playing the part of the flighty artist, Mia added, her voice dropping to a near whisper, I'll be doing my real job. Surveillance, research, finding every crack in their foundation. The plan was audacious. It was dangerous. It relied on me, a woman who had spent a lifetime being silent, to become a performer. It relied on Mia, a stranger, to become my most trusted confidant. For the first time in decades, I felt a spark. Not of joy, not yet, but of purpose. As we left the diner, Mia paused by the door. One thing, she said. When this is over, the diary is mine. It already is, I replied. We walked out into the afternoon sun. The world looked different, sharper, more vivid. I had spent 55 years in a gilded cage. Now the door was open. The truth was, I had found more than an investigator. I had found Eleanor's daughter. I had armed a ghost. And we were preparing for war. The sound arrived before the sight of it did. A low, throaty rumble that was utterly alien to the manicured silence of Havenwood. It was the sound of something coming, something unapologetic. Then the car itself turned onto my street. A convertible the colour of a defiant sunflower slicing through the muted grey and beige of the neighbourhood. And in it, a young woman with hair the colour of dark honey laughing. Her laughter wasn't polite. It was a full-throated, joyous noise that seemed to physically push back against the decades of oppressive quiet that had defined my home. This was Mia. She pulled into my driveway, the engine sputtering to a stop, with a final, satisfied cough. She vaulted over the car door, rather than using it landing lightly on the pavement. She was all energy and motion, a stark contrast to the stagnant air I had breathed for 55 years. She surveyed my house, the house Richard had built as a monument to his control, and she didn't look impressed or intimidated. She just grinned, a flash of white teeth. So, she said, her voice carrying easily in the still air, this is the fortress. I watched her from the living room window, a ghost in my own home. My heart was a frantic bird against my ribs. This was it. The first move. The first time I had invited a stranger into my life without Richard's vetting his approval, his signature on the deal. Mia was a variable he could never have predicted. She moved into the guest room, a room that had been reserved for only the most carefully selected sycophantic relatives. Within an hour, it was transformed. A brightly coloured scarf was draped over a lamp books, with provocative titles were stacked on the nightstand, and the scent of some exotic citrusy perfume replaced the stale scent of potpourri and disuse. The house already felt different. It felt like it was beginning to breathe again. A few days later, the inevitable black sedan pulled up. David and Sophia arriving for their weekly welfare check, a ritual that felt more like an audit. But this time, the scene that greeted them was not what they expected. I was not sitting in my armchair waiting with a cup of weak tea. I was on the front lawn, barefoot in the grass, attempting to follow Mia's instructions for a yoga pose. My limbs, stiff from decades of inactivity and fear, felt clumsy and foreign. I was wobbling, trying to find my balance in a pose she called Warrior 2. Breathe into it, Elizabeth. Mia said, her voice calm and encouraging. Feel the ground under your feet. It's your ground. I was trying to feel it when David's voice, sharp and laced with irritation, cut through the air. Mother, what on earth are you doing? I turned slowly, trying to maintain some semblance of dignity while my ankle trembled. David stood on the walkway, his arms crossed his face, a mask of disapproval. He looked so much like his father in that moment, the same rigid posture, the same sense of ownership over everything he surveyed, including me. Sophia stood a pace behind him, a handbag clutched in front of her like a shield. Her smile was a masterpiece of social engineering, a perfect brittle curve that didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were busy scanning Mia from head to toe, cataloguing, assessing, and dismissing her. "We're doing yoga, David," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "It's good for the circulation?" "Yoga," he repeated as if the word itself were an obscenity. "On the front lawn. The sun is lovely." Mia chimed in, stepping forward. She moved with a fluid grace that made David look even more like a statue. "It's wonderful for vitamin D. You should try it sometime." Sophia's brittle smile tightened. "It's wonderful that you're getting out, Elizabeth," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "But who is this girl?" The word girl was loaded, meant to diminish, to infantilize. Mia didn't flinch. She extended a hand to Sophia, her gaze direct and unwavering. "I'm Mia," she said, her voice clear and bright. When Sophia tentatively placed her hand in Mia's, Mia's grip was firm, confident. A handshake that gave nothing away and took everything in. "I'm your mother's new best friend." The silence that followed was exquisite. It was deeper and more profound than any silence Richard had ever imposed. This was a silence born of pure shock. David's jaw worked silently. Sophia snatched her hand back as if she'd been burned. They looked at me, then at Mia, then back at me, their minds whirring, trying to compute this new, impossible data. An unsanctioned friend. A young, vibrant, confident friend. A variable they couldn't control. Their shock was a physical thing in the air, and I drank it in. It was the first authentic meal I'd had in years. The performance, once begun, had to be flawless. Mia wasn't just my companion. She was my producer, my director, and my publicist. Her next move was to bring my quiet rebellion into the digital age. "The gossip mill in a town like Havenwood is faster than a wire service," she explained one evening, scrolling through her phone. "But it's unreliable. We need to control the narrative." She created an Instagram account. The username she chose was a small act of genius, golden, years rebellion. I'd never had a social media account in my life. Richard had called it a sewer for lonely people. Seeing my name attached to that defiant title felt like a key turning in a lock I didn't even know existed. The first picture was of us at a local vineyard, a place I had driven past 1,000 times but had never been allowed to visit. Richard didn't approve of public drinking. In the photo, I was holding a glass of deep red wine, and I was smiling. A real smile, not the placid, empty thing I had perfected for his business dinners. Mia's caption was a masterpiece of subtle warfare. "Turns out Merlot is my colour, reclaiming my time one sip at a time. Golden years rebellion, finally free." The posts continued. A picture of my hands caked in wet grey clay at a pottery class. The caption, "Moulding a new future." Us at a small local concert, the coloured lights flashing across my face. The caption, "Finding my rhythm." Mia was meticulous. She tagged every local business, every community page. She knew that Sophia's network of friends, the town's self-appointed social observers, would see it. They would talk. The whispers would carry. The true masterstroke came about a week later. Mia knew that Sophia's closest confidant was Carol Gable, from 2 houses down, a woman whose curtains twitched every time a car passed. Mia orchestrated a chance encounter in the supermarket. I watched from the end of the aisle as Mia, holding a carton of oat milk, bumped into Carol. "Oh, Carol, hello!" Mia chirped, as if they were old friends. "How lovely to see you." Carol, flattered by the attention, preened. "Mia, dear, I see you're keeping our Elizabeth busy. The whole town is talking." "Oh, she's the one keeping me busy." Mia laughed. "She has so much energy now. It's wonderful. But honestly, it's the financial stuff that's exhausting." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Don't tell anyone I said this, but sorting out Richard's estate is a nightmare. The man was disorganized." She let that hang in the air. "Thank goodness Elizabeth found that new financial advisor. He's an absolute shark. He's coming over next week to go through everything, help her set up her own trusts, her own portfolio. She says she wants to finally be in the driver's seat of her own life." Mia delivered the lines with the perfect blend of feigned indiscretion and genuine concern. She knew Carol would be on the phone to Sophia before the ice cream in her cart had a chance to melt. The bait was taken. That Sunday, David and Sophia arrived, not with forced smiles, but with faces etched in panic. They sat stiffly on the sofa. Richard had chosen the one I'd always hated. "Mother, you see," David began, dispensing with any pleasantries. "We've been hearing things." "Oh," I asked, taking a slow, deliberate sip of my tea. The cup felt steady in my hand. "This financial advisor?" Sophia jumped in her voice a little too high-pitched. "We just feel, given your situation, that it would be prudent for David to be present for any meetings. As Richard's son, he has a right to oversee the estate." "Richard is gone, Sophia." I said, my voice quiet but firm. "It is no longer his estate, it's mine, and I have it well in hand. But a stranger," David pressed, his frustration boiling over. "You don't know this man. He could be a charlatan, a con artist, trying to take advantage of you in your grief." The hypocrisy was so thick I could have choked on it. He was accusing a phantom of the very thing he was trying to do. "His name is Mr. Alistair Finch." Mia supplied helpfully from the doorway, holding a plate of cookies. "He comes very highly recommended. Specializes in asset management for widows. Very discreet." The name was fake, of course. Mr. Alistair Finch didn't exist. But the fear in their eyes was very, very real. They weren't just worried about a stranger. They were terrified of a professional, someone who could read a balance sheet and expose the truth of what Richard had left behind, someone who could put up a legal firewall between them and my money. Their control was slipping through their fingers like sand, and they were beginning to panic. And panicked people make mistakes. Their countermove came faster and was more brutal than I had anticipated. It didn't arrive with a phone call or a tense conversation. It arrived via a courier on a motorcycle, a man in a helmet who handed me a thick, crisp envelope that felt cold to the touch. It was from a law firm, one with a name so long and prestigious it took up 3 lines on the letterhead. Inside, the language was just as cold. It was a petition to the court, an emergency petition. I read the words, but my mind struggled to process them. They felt like a foreign language, a language of violence dressed in formal wear. "Petitioner David Miller, son of the respondent Elizabeth Miller." It went on. They were seeking an emergency conservatorship. I sank into a kitchen chair, the heavy paper trembling in my hands. Mia came and stood behind me, reading over my shoulder. Her hand rested gently on my back, the only point of warmth in a world that had suddenly gone ice cold. The petition cited my recent erratic behavior. It listed the Instagram posts as Exhibit A. My trip to the vineyard was reframed as public inebriation. The pottery class was frivolous and wasteful spending. Attending a concert was evidence of a declining mental state inconsistent with a woman of her age. It claimed I was a danger to myself and my financial security. And then the true dagger, susceptibility to undue influence. It named Mia directly. It painted her as a predator, a grifter who had sunk her claws into a confused, grieving old woman. They were using my own rebellion, my first gasps of freedom, as the very evidence to lock me away. They were trying to have me declared mentally incompetent. It wasn't just about controlling the money anymore. It was about erasing me. The cheerful, rebellious facade we had so carefully constructed fell away. The kitchen was silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator. The vibrant energy Mia had brought into the house seemed to retreat, beaten back by the sterile, legalistic venom on the page. "They're trying to bury you, Elizabeth," Mia said, her voice stripped of all its usual brightness. It was flat cold. The voice of an investigator, not a companion. I stared at the words. Undue influence. The irony was a bitter acid in my throat. My entire life had been lived under the undue influence of a tyrant. My son had learned the craft at his father's knee. I looked at Mia, at her fierce, intelligent eyes. I saw Eleanor in them. I saw the woman Richard had already buried. These men, they were good at burying women. A tremor of the old fear ran through me, a familiar ghost. The fear of being powerless, of being disbelieved, of being locked away where no one could hear me. For a moment, I was that young woman again, trapped and silent. Then I looked at the petition again, the arrogant, dismissive tone. The way David used his father's name like a shield. The way he twisted my joy into a symptom of madness. And the fear curdled into something else. Something hard and cold and clear. Rage. No. I said, my voice low and steady. I folded the letter with a sharp, decisive crease. They aren't burying me. I looked up at Mia, the daughter of the woman they thought they had silenced forever. They're digging their own graves. We just have to provide the shovels. That night, the actress disappeared, and the surveillance expert took her place. Mia's cheerful facade was a tool, and she put it away as clinically as a surgeon putting down a scalpel. They want you to move, she said, her voice all business, as she unpacked a discreet black case on the dining room table. They want you to declutter, so let's give them what they want. Under the guise of sorting through 55 years of accumulated life, Richard's life, not mine, we began to prepare the battlefield. While I boxed up old china, we both knew would never be used again. Mia went to work. She moved with a quiet, efficient grace that was unnerving. The digital photo frame on the mantelpiece, a gift from Sophia last Christmas, meant to display a rotating loop of family photos, was subtly modified. A pinhole camera lens, no bigger than a grain of rice, was now nestled in the dark plastic frame. A handsome leather-bound copy of War and Peace, that had sat unread on the bookshelf for 40 years, was hollowed out. It now contained a high-fidelity audio recorder with a motion-activated sensor, a new smoke detector in the hallway, a new power strip behind the television. Each one, a silent digital witness. The devices were state-of-the-art, feeding directly to a secure, encrypted cloud server that Mia accessed on a laptop she kept hidden in her room. They won't be looking for this, she said, showing me the simple interface. They think they're dealing with a confused old woman and a flighty art student. They're underestimating us. That's our single greatest advantage. Our evenings transformed into a new ritual. We would sit together in the dim light of the kitchen, the laptop open between us, and we would listen. We would listen to the sound of my son and his wife plotting my demise. The audio was clear, the video sharp. We saw them walk through my living room when they thought I was out, their voices low and conspiratorial. They weren't just greedy. They were ghouls, picking over a life they had already declared over. Look at this junk! David's voice crackled through the speakers one afternoon. He was holding up a small porcelain bird I had loved. What is she going to do with this in the nursing home? We can get a few hundred for the whole collection on eBay. David, wait until the papers are signed. Sophia's voice cautioned, but there was no conviction in it. The lawyer said we have to follow the process. The process is a formality, he sneered. She's losing it. Everyone can see it. That girl Mia has her head completely turned around. Once the judge signs off, she's in the home. Then she'll sign whatever we put in front of her. She always does. That last line hit me with the force of a physical blow. She always does. It was the story of my marriage, the story of my motherhood. A lifetime of coerced signatures, of silent capitulations, of nodding and agreeing, just to keep the peace, just to survive until the next day. I had been signing my life away piece by piece for half a century, and my own son saw it not as a tragedy, but as a tool he could use. We heard them mock my new clothes. We heard them laugh about the yoga on the lawn. We heard them discuss which of my assets they would liquidate, first the stocks, the art, the house itself. They spoke of me in the past tense, as if I were already a portrait on the wall, a problem to be managed, an estate to be processed. We have to be careful with the house, David said in another recording. The market's high. If we sell it quickly, we can get it all into our accounts before anyone starts asking questions about Dad's other affairs. Other affairs. Sophia asked, a note of genuine curiosity in her voice. Nothing, David said quickly. Just old business. The point is, this is our chance to be set for life. Dad would have wanted it this way. He would have wanted me to be in control. He was wrong. Richard would never have wanted David to be in control. Richard wanted only Richard to be in control, even from beyond the grave. But David had inherited the ambition without the cunning. He had inherited the cruelty without the foresight. He was building a prison for me using his father's old rusty tools, and we were recording every single hammer blow. Each night, we would save the files, labeling them with dates and times. We were building our arsenal, one whispered, venomous word at a time. The legal petition was their declaration of war, but Mia's masterstroke was an act of psychological infiltration. It wasn't enough to prove David was greedy. We had to dismantle him completely. And the key to that was Sophia. She's not just a villain in this Elizabeth Weiss. Mia said to me one night, after we'd listened to another recording of Sophia meekly agreeing to David's plans. She's a prisoner too. A different cell, maybe a nicer view, but it's the same prison you were in. And frightened prisoners can be convinced to testify against the warden. Mia began her performance. It was subtle, brilliant. She positioned herself not as my defender, but as a neutral party, an outsider, unfortunately caught in a messy family dispute. When David and Sophia visited, Mia was a model of polite deference to them while remaining fiercely loyal to me. She would offer Sophia a cup of tea, compliment her dress, ask about her day, with a sincerity that was entirely manufactured but utterly convincing. She was planting seeds of trust in scorched earth. The opening came after a particularly tense visit. David had spent the entire hour berating me about the legal costs I was forcing upon him, all while standing in the house his father had paid for. The air was thick with his rage. We overheard the argument they had in the car as they drove away, the microphone in the photo frame catching their voices until they were out of range. David was shouting. Sophia was crying. That evening, Mia made her move. She sent a simple text to Sophia. Are you okay? He was very hard on you both today. Thinking of you, an hour passed. Then 2. Just as I was beginning to think the gambit had failed, Mia's phone buzzed. It was Sophia. Mia put the phone on speaker and with a tap of her finger began recording the call. Sophia, are you all right? You sound upset. A choked sob came from the other end. I'm sorry to bother you. You're not bothering me at all. Mia said, her voice a warm, comforting balm. You can talk to me. And then the dam broke. The carefully constructed facade of the perfect wife, the supportive partner, crumbled into a torrent of grief and fear. I can't do this anymore. Sophia wept, her voice ragged. He's just like him. Oh God, he's exactly like his father. Like Richard. Mia prompted gently. Yes, he looks at me the same way. That coldness. He controls everything, Mia. Everything. I have an allowance like a child. He tracks my car. He reads my emails. He says it's because he wants to protect me, but it's not. It's about control. It's always about control. I sat across from Mia, motionless, listening to my own life story being told back to me by my daughter-in-law. The words were different, but the music was the same. The isolation, the financial strangulation, the slow, methodical erosion of a person's soul. Last week, Sophia continued, her voice dropping to a terrified whisper. I had lunch with my sister. I didn't tell him because I knew he'd disapprove. He wants me here, in the house. He checked my phone's location data. He knew where I'd been. The things he said to me when he got home. He didn't hit me. Not like Richard hit you. I know he did Elizabeth. I saw the bruises sometimes. David doesn't do that. He just dismantles you. With words. He makes you feel so small, so stupid, so worthless that you start to believe it. I feel like I'm in a prison. And the worst part is I helped him build it. Mia's face was a mask of calm, professional empathy. Her hand was steady as she held the phone, the small red recording icon glowing on the screen. She was capturing every sob, every confession. Sophia's words trailed off into exhausted, hopeless weeping. I just want it to be over, she whispered. I know, Mia said softly. I know you do. When the call ended, Mia saved the file. The second victim, she labeled it. She turned to me, her expression grim. This wasn't a moment of triumph. It felt tragic. We had our weapon, a piece of evidence so powerful it could shatter David's life. But it was forged from the pain of another woman. The twist wasn't just that David was a villain. It was that he was a disease, a sickness passed down from father to son. He hadn't just inherited his father's house. He'd inherited his cruelty. And in his quest to honor Richard's legacy, he had recreated it perfectly, trapping his own wife in the very same cycle of abuse I was fighting to escape. Sophia wasn't just a co-conspirator anymore. She was collateral damage. She was Eleanor. She was me. And that changed everything. The silence in my house had a weight to it. For 55 years it had been the heavy, oppressive silence of Richard's moods. Now it was a different kind of quiet. A taut, humming silence like the air before a lightning strike. I picked up the phone, my fingers steady on the cool glass. I dialed David's number and held it to my ear, composing my voice, letting it tremble just so. He answered on the second ring, his tone impatient, clipped. What is it, Mother? I took a breath, summoning the image of the woman I had been for 5 decades. Small, frightened. David. I began my voice, a practiced, fragile whisper. I've been thinking about what you said. About everything. A pause. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, the suspicion warring with his desire for this to be easy. And, he prompted the single word, dripping with condescension. You're right, I said, letting a little sob catch in my throat. It wasn't entirely fake. A part of me was mourning the woman who had to learn such tricks. I'm old. I'm just so tired of fighting. You're my son. You should be the one to look after things. The satisfaction in his voice was a physical thing, a wave of smugness I could feel through the phone. I'm glad you're finally seeing reason, Mother. It's for your own good. You know that. I do. I lied. Why don't you and Sophia come for dinner tonight? We can discuss it, settle things. I added the hook, the one that would assure him this wasn't a trap. And bring your lawyer, Mr. Harrison. Let's just get this all over with. I want it to be done. We'll be there at 7, he said, the triumph barely concealed. Don't go to too much trouble. He hung up without saying goodbye. I put the phone down and looked at my hands. They weren't trembling at all. For the first time in my life, I was cooking a meal not out of duty, but as an act of war. I roasted a chicken the way Richard had always demanded. I made mashed potatoes smooth and creamy. I prepared green beans blanched and tossed in butter. It was the menu of my servitude, a final ghost-like performance of the compliant wife and mother. Each chop of the knife, each stir of the pot was a farewell. They arrived precisely at 7, as if punctuality were a virtue that could mask their greed. David strode in first, a conquering general returning to an already pacified territory. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my monthly budget for decades, his smile wide and predatory. Behind him was Sophia, a ghost in his shadow. She was wearing a simple dress, her eyes darting around the dining room, refusing to meet mine. She clutched her handbag like a shield. And then came the lawyer, Mr. Harrison. He was a man built of soft edges and sharp angles, a pinstriped stomach preceding a face that held a permanent expression of bland, professional concern. He carried a polished leather briefcase that seemed to hum with the weight of my future neatly packaged into clauses and subclauses. "Mother," David said, kissing the air near my cheek. "You look tired. It's good you're doing this." He gestured to Harrison. "You remember Mr. Harrison?" "Of course," I said, my voice still holding that carefully crafted frailty. "Please sit down. Everything is ready." They took their seats at the dining table. My dining table. The dark, imposing slab of mahogany where Richard had presided over 55 years of silent, suffocating meals. The same chairs, the same oppressive silence descending as I brought the food from the kitchen. I placed the golden brown chicken in the center of the table, a sacrificial offering. David immediately took the carving knife and fork, assuming his father's position, without a flicker of hesitation. It was a role he had been rehearsing his whole life. "Well, this looks lovely, Mother," he said, slicing into the bird with practiced ease. "A little taste of the old days before we move on to the new." Mr. Harrison gave a tight, thin-lipped smile. "Your son has your best interests at heart, Mrs. Miller. The conservatorship is simply a formality to protect you and your assets." "My assets," I repeated softly, watching David heap potatoes onto his plate. "Exactly," David said, not looking up. "We can't have you being taken advantage of. That friend of yours, Mia, who knows what her intentions are? And the spending, the Instagram account? It's just not dignified. We need to put a stop to it. For your own protection." Sophia said nothing. She picked at a single green bean, pushing it back and forth across her plate. Her fork made a tiny scraping sound against the porcelain, the only noise she contributed. She looked pale, her skin almost translucent under the warm light of the chandelier. I saw a faint yellowing bruise on the inside of her wrist as she reached for her water glass. A familiar shadow in a familiar place. The meal was an excruciating pantomime of civility. David and Mr. Harrison talked about the market, about interest rates, about the smooth legal process ahead. They spoke as if I weren't there, a piece of furniture that happened to be serving them dinner. "The papers are all drawn up," Harrison said, patting his briefcase. "We can go over them after dessert. It's very standard. David will assume control of the estate, your finances, and make all necessary medical decisions. It will be a great relief for you, I'm sure." "A great relief," I echoed. David leaned back in his chair, dabbing his mouth with a napkin. He was full-sated victorious. "It's for the best." We've already been in touch with a wonderful facility just outside the city. Quiet, peaceful, top-notch care. You'll be much more comfortable there. So that was it. The final destination. Not just my house, but my life signed over and packaged away. Sophia flinched a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. Her eyes met mine for a fraction of a second, and in them I saw not malice, but a desperate, cornered fear. She knew what it was like to be packaged away. I stood up and began to clear the plates. My movements were slow, deliberate. "I'll get dessert," I said, "and coffee." As I walked into the kitchen, the swinging door cut off their voices. I leaned against the counter, my heart a steady, heavy drum against my ribs. The performance was nearly over. The curtain was about to rise. I opened a drawer, my hand closing, not around the dessert forks, but around the cool, worn leather of Eleanor's diary. I returned to the dining room carrying a tray. On it were 4 cups of coffee and a small stack of dessert plates. But in my other hand, I held the book. I set the tray down and walked to the head of the table, my rightful place, which had been vacant for so long. I placed the diary on the polished wood. The sound it made was soft, but it landed in the room with the force of a gavel. 3 pairs of eyes turned to it. "Before we sign anything," I said, and my voice was different now. The fragility was gone, stripped away, leaving something hard and clear beneath. "I want to read you a little bedtime story." David scoffed a short, ugly sound. "Mother, don't be ridiculous. We're not here for games." He looked at his lawyer, see what I have to deal with, new expression on his face. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. "Mrs. Miller, perhaps we should focus on the legal matters at hand." I ignored them both. My attention was on the book. I opened it, the pages whispering as they turned. I didn't need to search for a passage. I knew them all by heart. I found a page dog-eared from my many readings. "I ran into an old friend today." I began to read, my voice ringing out in the quiet room. The words were Eleanor's, but the pain was universal. "She asked me why I always wore long sleeves even in the summer. I laughed and told her I get cold easily. I didn't tell her it was to hide the fingerprints Richard leaves on my arms when he gets angry. He doesn't hit me, not with a closed fist. He grabs. He squeezes. He told me it's not abuse if it doesn't leave a real mark. He says a man has a right to be angry. He says I provoke him." I paused and looked up. David was staring at me, a smirk playing on his lips, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "What is this?" he asked, his voice laced with annoyance. "Are you reading from some trashy novel, Mother? This is pathetic." I kept my eyes on him. "Let me continue." I found another passage. "He emptied my bank account today. Said I was being irresponsible, that a woman can't be trusted with money. He gives me an allowance now. Like a child. I have to ask for permission to buy groceries. He reviews the receipts. He told me it's for our own good, to secure our future. But it feels like a cage. Every dollar he gives me is another bar." David threw his hands up in a gesture of exasperation. "This is insane. You're delusional." He turned to his lawyer. "Mr. Harrison, you see. This is exactly what I was talking about. Her mind is going. She's making up stories. This is pure fan fiction. But I wasn't watching David anymore. I was watching Sophia. She was no longer pale. She was chalk white. Her hands were clenched in her lap, her knuckles bloodless. Her eyes were fixed on the diary, her breathing shallow. She recognized the architecture of her own prison in the pages of a dead woman's journal. She knew the language of control, the long sleeves, the allowance, the excuse that it was all for her own good. The patterns were as familiar to her as the sound of David's keys in the front door. I turned the page. "He told me no one would ever believe me." I read, my voice dropping lower, more intimate. "He said I was hysterical, that I was lucky to have him because who else would want someone so broken? He said it with a smile. That's the worst part. The smile. As if he was doing me a favor by destroying me piece by piece. Sophia made a small, choked sound, a tiny gasp of air. David's head whipped around to look at his wife. What is it, Sophia? Don't tell me you're buying into this nonsense. She wouldn't look at him. She just stared at the diary at me, her eyes wide with a horrified recognition that went far beyond sympathy. It's the story of a man named Richard, I said quietly, closing the book. But it could be the story of any man who learns his cruelty at his father's table. David laughed, then a loud booming sound designed to fill the room and crush everything else. Oh, this is rich. This is really, truly pathetic. You hate Dad so much you have to invent a secret tortured lover for him after he's dead. You're going to use this work of fiction to try and stop us. You have no idea what you're up against. He gestured to Mr. Harrison's briefcase. That is reality. This, he flicked a dismissive finger towards the diary, is a fantasy. Just as the word fantasy left his lips, the kitchen door swung open. It wasn't the gentle swing of a servant entering. It was a hard, deliberate push. Mia stood in the doorway, but it wasn't the Mia they knew. The bubbly, slightly ditzy actress was gone. The bright, colourful clothes were replaced by a sharp, dark pantsuit. The wide-eyed, giggling girl who took pictures for my Instagram was replaced by a woman whose face was a mask of cold, controlled fury. Her eyes narrowed and focused, burned with an intensity that made David's manufactured rage look like a child's tantrum. She held herself with the coiled stillness of a predator. It's not fan fiction, Mia said. Her voice was unrecognizable. It was low dangerous and carried an authority that silenced the room instantly. David stared at her, momentarily confused. What the hell are you doing here? The help's work is done for the night. Mia took a slow step forward, her gaze locked on him. It's my mother's diary. The statement hung in the air, heavy and irrefutable. Sophia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Mr. Harrison's professional blandness finally cracked his eyebrows, shooting up. David's smug expression faltered, replaced by a flicker of genuine confusion, then dawning suspicion. Mia walked to the table and placed her phone down next to the diary. Her movements were economical, precise. You seem to think fiction and reality are two different things, David. Let's clear that up for you. Her thumb swiped across the screen and pressed play. A voice filled the dining room. David's voice. Can you believe it? Golden Age rebel. She thinks she's some kind of icon. She's just an old woman making a fool of herself. Then Sophia's voice, nervous but complicit. David, people are seeing it? My friends have asked me. David's recorded voice cut her off, impatient. Who cares? It's proof. Harrison says it's perfect for the petition. Erratic behavior. Fiscal irresponsibility. It's a gift. Just keep smiling, keep telling her we're worried. As soon as the conservatorship is granted, we liquidate the house and the art collection before she can pour it all into, I don't know, a trip to space. He laughed. The sound was tinny and cruel, coming from the phone's small speaker. The real David, the one sitting at the table, went rigid. His face, which had been flushed with triumph, was now mottling with rage and panic. What is this? This is illegal. You can't record me in my own mother's house. He lunged for the phone, his chair scraping violently against the floor. But Mia was faster. Her hand shot out and covered the device, her body tensed. She was immovable. Your mother's house, she said, her voice dripping with contempt. You were plotting to steal it from her. I think that makes it a hostile environment. The laws are a little different in that case. David stood there, half-crouched, his hand hovering uselessly over hers. His mask of civilized control was gone, replaced by the raw, ugly face of a bully who had just been challenged. There's more, Mia said calmly. her eyes never leaving his. She looked at Sophia, a flicker of something that might have been pity in her gaze. "I'm sorry about this, Sophia, but you're part of it too." She tapped the screen again. A new audio file began to play. This time it was just Sophia's voice, and it was breaking, shattered. It was from the phone call she'd made to Mia a week ago, believing she was confiding in a sympathetic friend. "I don't know what to do," her recorded voice sobbed. "He's just like him. He's exactly like his father. He checks my credit card statements every single day. He told me if I ever thought about leaving, he'd make sure I'd never see a penny, that he'd tell everyone I was crazy unstable. Last week, he got so angry I bought a new pair of shoes without asking. He grabbed my arm so hard." The recorded voice hitched thick with tears and shame. "He told me he wasn't even touching me, that I was imagining it, that I was making it all up to be dramatic. The same words. They're always the same words his father used on Elizabeth. I hear them in my sleep. I'm so trapped." A choked, guttural sob ripped from the real Sophia's throat. She crumpled in her chair, as if her spine had dissolved, burying her face in her hands. The sound of her own recorded misery, her most secret and shameful confession being broadcast to her abuser and his lawyer, was her complete undoing. David stared at his wife, his face a canvas of pure, unadulterated rage. The last vestiges of his composure shattered. This was a betrayal he couldn't comprehend. His victim, his accomplice, had given the enemy the very weapon they needed. His world, so carefully constructed on foundations of control and intimidation, was imploding in real time. "You," he breathed, turning his furious gaze from Sophia to Mia. "You bitch." Before he could move, before he could say another word, a new light entered the room. It came from the sideboard against the far wall, where a closed laptop sat. The screen glowed to life, illuminating the face of a man in his late 60s, with kind eyes and a jaw set with determination. "My lawyer, Mr. Albright. Mr. and Mrs. Miller." He began, his voice calm and clear through the laptop's speakers, cutting through the toxic atmosphere like a surgeon's scalpel. "Mr. Harrison, good evening." Harrison, who had been frozen in a state of professional shock, blinked. "Albright. What is the meaning of this?" "The meaning, Mr. Harrison, is due diligence," Albright said smoothly. "Something your client should have performed before launching this crusade." "Mr. Miller," he said, his eyes finding David's on the screen, "before you fought so hard to inherit this house, perhaps you should have taken a closer look at your father's business dealings." David was still vibrating with rage, but a new emotion was creeping into his eyes. Fear. "My father's business is none of your concern." "Oh, but it is," Albright countered, "because your father, Richard Miller, wasn't just an abuser. He was a crook. A very thorough one, I'll admit. For the last 15 years, he was engaged in systematic loan fraud." A thick silence descended. Even Sophia's sobbing subsided into shuddering breaths. Albright continued, his tone matter of fact, as if explaining a simple math problem. "He used this house, Havenwood, as his primary collateral. He took out massive high-interest loans from, let's call them, unconventional lenders, the kind who don't advertise on television. He leveraged the property to its absolute limit, and then some funneling the money into a series of failing shell corporations registered offshore. The man you thought was a brilliant investor was in reality a desperate gambler playing with borrowed money." Mr. Harrison began to look ill. That's a serious accusation, Albright." "It's a serious reality, Harrison," my lawyer replied. "And here's the kicker. These loan agreements all contained a death clause, a common feature in high-risk lending. The moment the borrower, Richard Miller, is declared deceased, the full balance of all loans becomes immediately due and payable. His death triggered a financial avalanche." The color was draining from David's face now, the angry red fading to a pasty, sickly grey. He was finally starting to understand. So you see, Albright went on, his voice, devoid of triumph, filled only with the cold weight of fact. The estate you've been fighting for so viciously isn't worth millions. It's not worth anything. In fact, with accrued interest and penalties, the estate is currently underwater to the tune of approximately $7.5 million. $7.5 million. The number just hung there. An anchor. David shook his head, a slow, disbelieving motion. No. No, the house alone. The art. It's worth at least 5. Correct, said Albright. Which still leaves a $2.5 million deficit. A debt which now belongs to the heir of the estate. He paused, letting the final devastating point land. Under normal circumstances, an heir can refuse an insolvent inheritance. But you didn't, did you, Mr. Miller? You and your counsel filed a petition for conservatorship with the explicit intent of taking control of all assets of the estate. You legally and formally declared your intention to inherit. You fought for it. You demanded it. Albright leaned slightly closer to his camera. By fighting so hard for this house, you have legally, irrevocably accepted the inheritance. All of it. The house, the art, and the debt. The lenders have been notified. They know who the new owner is. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Congratulations, Mr. Miller. You won. The connection ended. The screen went black. But the darkness it left behind was nothing compared to the abyss that opened in David's eyes. The rage was gone. The smugness was a distant memory. All that was left was the hollow, silent scream of a man realizing he hadn't just lost a battle. He had inherited an anchor, and it was already pulling him down into the crushing, lightless deep. He hadn't won a prize. He'd won his own drowning. Elizabeth Full-O. The silence that fell in that dining room was heavier than any stone. It was the sound of a world ending. David's world. His face, which had been a mask of smug triumph only moments before, had collapsed into a ruin of disbelief. His mouth opened and closed, a fish gasping for air on a dry dock. The sounds that came out were not words, but small strangled protests, the bleating of a lamb, realizing the butcher's knife is already at its throat. No. He stammered, his eyes darting from Mia's cold, resolute face to the silent speakers on the table, then to me. No, you. You can't. This is illegal. This is entrapment. You fabricated this. All of it. His lawyer, Mr. Davies, a man whose tailored suit seemed to shrink on his frame with every passing second, did not look at David. He looked at me. He looked at Mia. He looked at the 2 small, powerful recording devices. He was a man of calculations of billable hours and acceptable risks. He was watching his retainer evaporate, watching a potential lawsuit for malpractice materialize in its place. He recognized a checkmate when he saw one. He slowly, deliberately began to close the clasps on his leather briefcase. Click, click. Each sound was a nail in David's coffin. David Davies said, his voice flat, devoid of the unctuous confidence it had held an hour ago. My counsel at this moment is for you to remain silent. Silent. David shrieked, his voice cracking. She's trying to destroy me with lies. You have to do something, Sue. Her Sue. Her. He pointed a trembling finger at Mia, who didn't even flinch. Davies stood up, smoothing the front of his jacket. It was a purely reflexive gesture. There was no salvaging his professional dignity in this room. My firm will be formally withdrawing our representation in the morning, David. You'll receive the paperwork. I'd advise you to find new counsel. Immediately. He didn't offer a handshake. He didn't even offer a nod. He simply turned and walked out of the dining room, his footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors, a steady, rhythmic retreat from a battle that was already lost. With his legal shield gone, David seemed to deflate. All the blustering entitlement, all the inherited arrogance of his father drained out of him, leaving behind a hollow, terrified shell. He turned his desperate gaze to the one person left at his side. Sophia. She hadn't moved. She sat perfectly still, her hands in her lap, her face a pale, unreadable mask. She was staring at the space where the lawyer had been, as if watching a door to a different life swing open. David reached for her hand across the table, his touch clumsy, pleading. Sophia, honey, we'll fight this. Together. It's all lies. You know it is. Tell them. For the first time, she turned her head and looked directly at him. And in her eyes I saw not fear, not anger, not even betrayal. I saw nothing. A complete and total void. The kind of emptiness that comes after every last emotion has been burned away. She had been a co-conspirator, yes, but she had also been a prisoner locked in a smaller, newer version of the same cage I had inhabited. The recording of her tearful confession had not just been a weapon against David. It had been her own reluctant declaration of independence. She had spoken her truth into the dark, and now in the light she had to stand by it. She slowly pulled her hand from his grasp. She didn't flinch or recoil. She simply removed it as if taking it away from a cold, inanimate object. She stood up her movements, graceful and deliberate. She looked at me a long, searching look. In it, I saw an apology, a plea, and a flicker of something I hadn't seen in her for years: respect. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Then, without a word to her husband, without a single glance back, she walked out of the room, out of the house, and out of the life that had been slowly strangling her. The front door closed behind her with a soft, final click. David stared at the empty doorway, his chest heaving. The complete and utter abandonment was something his privileged life had never prepared him for. He was alone, utterly and completely alone with the wreckage he and his father had built. I didn't say a word. I simply watched him. I wanted to see it. I needed to see the moment the last brick of his self-delusion crumbled. He finally looked at me, his eyes swimming with a toxic cocktail of hatred and pathetic pleading. Why, he whispered, the sound raw. After all he gave you. After all I did for you. Why? He gave me nothing, David. I said, my voice as calm and steady as a frozen lake. He took. And you learned his lessons all too well. This was never about the money. This was about the truth. Now I suggest you leave my house. He didn't move for a long moment. Then, with a guttural sob that was part rage and part despair, he shoved his chair back, scraping a long, ugly scar into the polished floor. A final act of petty vandalism. A final mark of his toxic legacy. And then he was gone. Mia and I didn't celebrate. There was no joy in this victory, only a grim, necessary satisfaction. It was like a surgery. Excising a cancer is not a moment of triumph. It is a moment of brutal, painful survival. Mia clicked off the recorders and began packing them away with quiet efficiency. The silence returned, but this time it was different. It wasn't heavy. It was clean, empty, ready to be filled with something new. The fallout was not a storm. It was a contamination spreading silently and invisibly through the digital veins of our community. Mia had been surgical. The audio files David and Sophia plotting my demise, his casual cruelty, his dismissal of my sanity, and most damningly Sophia's choked confession of his abuse, were not sent to the local news. That would have been too predictable, too easy for David to spin as a family dispute. Instead, Mia sent the encrypted package to a Twitch streamer, a young man out of Columbus who ran a channel called the Buckeye Crime Files. He specialized in unsolved mysteries and small-town scandals. He had a dedicated, ravenous audience of amateur sleuths and gossip hounds. He wasn't a journalist bound by traditional ethics. He was a storyteller in the modern age, and Mia knew he wouldn't be able to resist a story this juicy, this local, this perfect. A grieving widow, a grasping son, a secret lover, a hidden diary, and now the tapes. The stream went live 2 nights later. Mia and I watched on her laptop from the living room. The streamer, a man in his 20s, with bright green headphones and an overly earnest expression, played the clips. He framed it as the haunting of Havenwood. He painted a picture of the respectable Miller family, the patriarch Richard's recent passing the devoted son, David. Then he played the audio. He played David's voice, dripping with condescension, calling me a senile old bat who was losing her marbles. He played them, discussing which nursing home had the fewest visiting hours. The chat window on the side of the screen, a waterfall of emojis and text, exploded. It scrolled so fast you couldn't read the individual comments, but the sentiment was a tidal wave of shock and disgust. Then he played Sophia's confession. He gave a trigger warning, his voice suddenly somber. He played her weeping words about David's control, his temper, how he was becoming his father. The chat slowed. The frantic emojis were replaced with words. Wow, I know him. He coached my son's soccer team. Oh my God, that poor woman. Both of them. The story went viral in a way a newspaper article never could. It wasn't just information, it was entertainment. It was a spectacle. Clips were ripped and uploaded to TikTok set to dramatic music. Twitter threads dissected every word, cross-referencing David's public persona as a community banker with the private monster on the tapes. The Havenwood Facebook group, usually a sleepy forum for lost pets and complaints about garbage collection, became a digital courtroom. People who had offered me their condolences a few weeks ago were now publicly condemning my son. They had pitied the frail old widow. Now they saw the conniving, abusive son and the truth of the gilded cage I had lived in. David became a pariah overnight. His world, built on the illusion of respectability his father had curated, crumbled. Clients at his bank branch requested transfers. People would cross the street to avoid him. The invitations to golf tournaments and charity dinners stopped. He was a ghost in his own town, but the social ruin was only the beginning. The real ghosts were the ones Richard had left behind, the creditors, the men he had swindled, the businesses he had leveraged into oblivion. With the news of the estate's impending probate, they smelled blood. But the estate, as my lawyer had revealed, was a lie, a mountain of debt disguised as a mansion. The prize David had fought so viciously to claim was, in fact, the poison pill. By petitioning the court for guardianship, by making his claim on the inheritance so public and so aggressive, he had legally entangled himself in the financial morass. The sharks, realizing the main asset, my house, was now out of play, turned on the next available target. They turned on David. The certified letters began to arrive at his office, then at the small, sad apartment he had rented. Phone calls at all hours. Men in cheap suits showing up at his office speaking in low, threatening tones. He had inherited his father's debts, not his wealth. He had sought to be the king of a great empire and found himself the sole resident of a bankrupt, haunted ruin. He lost his job. He lost his reputation. He lost his wife. He lost the house he had tried to steal. He lost everything. I didn't stay to watch the final act of his self-destruction. There was a part of me, a dark, withered part, that Richard had cultivated that wanted to stay, that wanted to watch him squirm. But the larger part of me, the part that Mia had helped me rediscover, knew that my liberation wasn't contingent on his suffering. It was contingent on my own freedom. Watching him drown would only keep me chained to the shore. The day of the foreclosure auction for Havenwood was cold and grey, a perfect Ohio autumn day. We didn't go. Mia handled it all through a lawyer in Cleveland. She had set up a shell corporation a month prior, a simple LLC with a deliberately boring name, Midwest Property Solutions. Funded by me with a portion of the real money, Richard had hidden away the money he thought I never knew about. Our lawyer was the only serious bidder. The primary creditors, the big banks Richard had mortgaged the house to, just wanted to recoup their principal. They sold it for pennies on the dollar, a fraction of its market value. The gavel fell in a quiet, sterile courtroom downtown. A paper was signed. And just like that, the house was legally severed from the Miller name forever. It was no longer a home, no longer a prison. It was just an asset, a piece of property held by a corporation that on paper had no connection to me at all. We sold it a month later quietly through a high-end real estate agent who specialized in discreet sales. We sold it to a family from California, a tech executive and his wife, who thought the historic architecture was charming. They had no idea of the ghosts in the walls, of the quiet desperation and loud cruelties that the plaster had absorbed. They paid the full market value, and the money was wired to an account in the name of the foundation we were already planning. The day we left Ohio, the sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. We didn't have much to pack. I walked through the empty rooms of my small rental apartment one last time. I had left almost everything from the Havenwood house behind. The oppressive furniture, the dark, heavy curtains, the portraits of stern-faced ancestors. I took my clothes, a few books, and the small, worn, leather-bound diary of Eleanor. That was all. Everything else was part of a life I was leaving behind. Mia drove. I sat in the passenger seat, not looking back, as we merged onto the interstate heading east. We didn't talk much. We just listened to the hum of the tires on the asphalt, the sound of distance growing between who I was and who I was becoming. Our new apartment is not grand. It's a modest two-bedroom condo in a building that smells of salt and sea air. From my living room window, I can see the ocean. It stretches out to the horizon, a vast, restless expanse of grey and blue. Some days, it is calm and glittering. Other days, it is furious, crashing against the shore with a rage that feels ancient and familiar. It is vast and unforgiving, just like memory. But for the first time in my life, when I look at the horizon, it doesn't look like an ending. It feels like a beginning. The oppressive silence of Havenwood has been replaced by the rhythmic shushing of the waves and the cries of the gulls. It's a clean sound, a wild sound, a sound of life. Mia is here. She's not my companion for hire anymore, not the actress playing a part. The performance is over. She moves through the apartment with an easy familiarity, making coffee in the morning, arguing with me about which movie to watch at night. We have fallen into a comfortable, easy rhythm. She is not the ghost of a daughter lost. She is simply mine, my family. The one I chose, the one that was forged not in blood, but in a shared fight for justice. We are two solitary islands who have found an archipelago. Yesterday, we finalized the paperwork. The Eleanor Foundation is now a registered non-profit organization. Its mission is simple: to provide financial and legal resources for women seeking to escape abusive domestic situations. It is funded entirely by Richard's secret accounts, the money he siphoned off for decades to fund his double life to control and corrupt. His poison is now the antidote. His legacy of abuse will now be the engine of liberation for countless women he would have despised. Women like Eleanor, women like Sophia, women like me. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, I take out Eleanor's diary. I don't read the painful entries anymore. I just hold it. I feel the worn leather, the delicate paper. It is not a record of her death. It is the seed of my rebirth. She threw her story into the void, hoping someone would find it. And someone did. Her last desperate act was not an ending. It was a beginning, a call to arms that took decades to be answered. My name is Elizabeth Miller. For 55 years, I was a wife. For a few months, I was an avenger. Now I am something else entirely. I am 80 years old, and for the first time I feel like my life is my own. The world thinks a woman my age should be winding down content with her memories fading quietly into the twilight. But they are wrong. I am not fading. I am igniting. My rebellion has just begun.